And you know, when you think about it, the gospel is so contrary to the world in which we live. The gospel is good news today, yesterday, and forever. And today I want to talk about some really good news as well, all wrapped up in one single name, and that name is Jesus. I want to talk about what he tells his disciples and what we can recognize in a name. So I want to ask the question, what is in a name? And what impact does a name have upon each and every one of us? And in particular, what impact does the name of Jesus have upon each and every one of us as well? A name can be a thing of absolute beauty, or a name can terrorize us as well. So let me just throw out some names and see what kind of emotional impact you have with these names. Let's say, of course, one we're all familiar with, and it's amazing. She was singing the song about Brian Gumbel. You know, for us, we'd remember way back when he was doing the morning news. But let's throw out the name of Hitler. Okay, yes, that's Saddam Hussein, Princess Diana. Oh yeah, see, your tone of voice even changed with that. John Kennedy, Truman, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Herod. See, they names bring something to us. I think of Genghis Khan, we could go on forever and ever. And we realize that names can be loved and or hated. So with that thought in mind, Jesus says some strange things that it may not impact people in a way that they ought to, but Jesus talks about his own name. And when we look at the names that we know of Jesus, for example, Emmanuel, God with us, we think about Messiah, that brings with us a certain feeling and for us. But I want to go through a brief passage that Jesus gives to his disciples, talking about what they need to understand about who he is, about their relationship, and how they should function. And how they would function. Well, this begins here in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16 through 23. And this is what Jesus says: I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Now, he's using this as a metaphor. He's saying, this is like this. I am sending you out among sheep, among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Quite a contrast here that he gives. Sheep and wolves, snakes and doves. Be on your guard against men. They will hand you over to local councils to flog you in their synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what you shall say or how you should say it. At that time, you will be given what to say, for it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And then he says, brother will betray brother to death, father his child, children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. All men will hate you because of me, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And then he says, when you're persecuted in one place, flee to another. I tell you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now in the King James Version, here it talks, you will be persecuted because of me. In the King James, it says, for my name's sake. And I want to focus on that in particular. That is, what were they to do and who were they to represent? we're looking at here. Jesus' disciples, he's given instructions to them, and he's also given warnings. And so as we have read here in verse 22, and I'll read it, all men will hate you because of me. So when we think about that, you may not think that's a big deal, but it becomes a big deal quickly when we think about the name of Jesus. And we think about for his sake. We do things and we live life, and what Jesus is telling us, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of Jesus as well. It is for the sake of Christianity. And when we think of Christianity, as Christians, we have not done overall a good job of representing Jesus. On the one hand, we can be very, very self-righteous and condemning of other people and very, very judgmental. On the other hand, we can find ourselves not believing at all and disparaging the name of Jesus, and what we find oftentimes people using the name of Jesus, but in a very, very vain way. Now you think about name. Okay, does it really make any difference? What's the big deal about names? When we think about people who don't like their name, for example, people have certain names. Johnny Cash had a song about a boy named Sue. His name got him into all kinds of trouble. Of course, how the song goes, his dad was trying to toughen him up and all that. But there's a lot about names, and I want to start with, you think, well, how long has this been true? So let me contrast names, for example. Lucifer, meaning light bringer. Satan, devil. Lucifer doesn't seem nearly as bad as Satan or the devil. So that takes us back a long time ago in that regard. But I want to go back to Exodus chapter 20, because in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 7 is the giving of the Ten Commandments. And in verse 7 of this Ten Commandments, God has something to say about names. In verse 7, he says here, in verse 7, for us to be aware of, if I can find it here, has anyone become pledged? Well, where am I? I'm in Deuteronomy. This does not read the same as Exodus. I don't know why I was in Deuteronomy. Exodus chapter 20. That's the reason I was having difficulty finding verse 7. And I will find that here in a moment. But you're familiar with it. I'm sure you can quote it. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Now, have you ever heard anybody in our society misuse God's name? And of course, as we understand it, we remember, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. So we are not to misuse his name, the name of God. Now, let's jump forward, and then we're going to go backwards. In Matthew chapter 6, when Jesus was asked by his disciples about how to pray, and beginning here in verse 9, here's what Jesus has to say. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Now the Greek word here is hagazio, which meaning is to make holy, to consecrate, to venerate, to sanctify. So when we think about we are to sanctify, or we are to make holy, or we are to consecrate, then within that it has a responsibility of representing God in that manner. And it is a very, very positive manner in which we represent God, that we hallow his name, that it brings with it veneration. We think about it brings awe, it brings great respect. As Mr. Swagger was talking about last week, I didn't hear all of it, but the essence of it, trust God and obey God. That is, we sanctify, we do, and we represent him as being holy and righteous.
The world today is a challenging environment for Christian believers and followers of Jesus Christ. Looking for answers? Grace Communion International local churches in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto offers a comforting environment for Christians in search of spiritual growth and development. Contact our local ministry. Attend our local GCI churches at the times listed on your screen.